Oh,
Here we go. Okay, Paul.
So, on behalf of the North American Climate Justice Team, I have the honor today of welcoming all of you to this much anticipated webinar on permaculture with Kelda Lorax. I'd like to extend a special welcome to members of Kelda's family and friends, and there may even be some of her students and colleagues joining us, and a special welcome to Hala, Kelda's daughter. So anyone that wants to wave, they can. But to all of you, to our regular attendees, but especially to our guests, thank you for making our community complete this afternoon. So because we might have a few new people, we thought we'd just say a little thing about the North American Climate Justice Team who's sponsoring this event. We're an ad hoc team that began conversations around our deep concerns with climate change during Community of Christ 2019 World Conference. We began creating webinars in 2020, of which, and I just counted this week, this will be the 37th webinar that we've sponsored. And all of our webinars, along with the discussion sessions, worships, and sermons on sacredness of creation and more resources are archived on our website, which is there at the bottom of the screen. We also wanted to invite you to save these dates. So either get your phone out or jot down really quick those 4 dates. We have some special guests and topics lined up as we go forward, and we'll put this back up if we get a chance after we finish recording today. But we want to really invite you to continue to explore this year's theme, which is restoring right relationships. Restoring right relationships with each other and the earth is based on this sacred text at the top from our tradition. And this focus on restoring right relationships is not coincidentally echoing the voice of Indigenous elders who are wisely teaching us that it is not the land that has been broken, but our relationships to it. Robin Kimmerer even suggests that if we were to restore right relationships with the land itself will help restore right relationships among human people. And she further notes, I'll just let you read the quote on the importance of ecological restoration being inseparable from cultural and spiritual restoration. And after these last weeks of intense grief over the loss of our historical properties as a faith community, I wanted to propose today before we begin that the time has come to test the proposition that if we were to try restoring right relationships to the lands we still steward, if we treat the sacred spaces we still inhabit as sacred, the land itself will help us to restore right relationships with each other, as well as among all peoples and all creatures. So today's presentation seems pretty timely to me. So everything that's best about this beautiful world we inhabit is relationship and connection. So before turning to Kelda's professional qualifications, I want to briefly introduce her by letting you catch a glimpse of the delightful person she is and who is teaching us today. So 2 summers ago, my friends Jen and Dan Fisher stopped overnight at my home in Oregon, and over pizza on the patio on a really hot July evening, we chatted and talked about the work of this team. And I distinctly remember Jen saying, "Do you know my sister Kelda? Have you met my sister Kelda?" Well, as it turns out, I had heard about Kelda from her mom, Susan, who is on today and that many of us know. And it's a long story, but a few straight emails and busy lives later, here we are today, And as I said, I think the timing ended up being perfect. So as you can see, Kelda's the proud mother of Hala, daughter. She has more sisters. There's a cousin, Josh Fry, in Texas, some of you may know. Kelda tried adding up her family church connections, but she gave up. So instead, she sent this picture of a geodesic dome church that her grandfather built. And she noted to me that it's super efficient use of space and materials. She also said that Bill's wife was a staunch supporter of LGBTQ plus rights and enjoyed the fact that no one knew that they were arguing with her when she posted to church discussion boards. So clearly, Kelda comes by her passion for sustainable design, environmental activism, and social justice advocacy quite naturally. So as you're going to be seeing more of, Kelda carries cherished memories of being at Samish Island, and she's passing that love of that particular space on to Hala, who has also attended camps at Samish Island recently. As an educator, Kelda daily mentors humans into more satisfying relationships with their landscapes, and she says helps landscapes have more satisfying relationships with humans. With Hala's help, Kelda runs the Stardust Organic Market Garden on Cherokee Nation land in Northeast Oklahoma. I suggest checking out the website for more pictures of Hala and some special information about roles she plays in running the garden. But finally, it's clear to me from conversation and from reading Kelda's website that her environmental activism is fueled by a keen and uncompromising heart for justice. She has a demonstrated commitment to ethical approaches to sustainable living. She's acutely aware of Indigenous and land rights issues, and she's honest in confronting the ways in which all our attitudes about land ownership are still steeped in colonial injustices from the past. So I'll give you a brief glimpse of her professional bona fides, complete with acronyms, and you don't actually need to remember them. The purpose of this slide is really just to let you know you will not be in any doubt by the end of this hour and a half together that permaculture is Kelda's passion and expertise. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kelda.
Okay, thank you. Just give me a second to pull up a screen share. Let's get over here. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to say before I started how grateful I am for this team. I've been catching up, like I said to some of the team before we started, with a lot of the webinars you all have been doing. And it's just been so heartwarming to have like this very diverse set of topics you guys have been bringing in. And then just such great conversations about it within the church. And it's just, yeah, you're all doing really great work. So it's been really cool to see. And some of the things that I usually talk about, you all have already been talking about. Like the biggest thing we can do as an individual is to not think like an individual, but to think of like yourself as a member of the community. And let's see, one of the things I heard that, I mean, it's an Al Gore quote, but you guys have been thinking about it, is like, it's good to change the light bulbs, but it's better to change the laws. And so a lot of policy stuff you guys have been bringing in has been really cool too. So, and the solutions, the techniques, all of that I'm about to talk about is not new to this group. It's more of that permaculture tends to organize them all. And so with that, I think I will, let's see here. I'm actually going to go to this one first. Sorry. But so I'm here on the map and sure, go ahead. So my location is, I'm right in between, I'm in the ecotone between the tall grass prairie and the Ozark Plateau. So right in that space in between those. Also, I'm in the Ogeechee Creek watershed that drains into the Neosho, drains into the Grand and the Arkansas and then the Mississippi River. And then also I'm on Cherokee Nation land. It's the traditional land of the Osage. And as I think about what it means to be here, there's some traditional things that show that I did not earn the place on this land. Like it's Cherokee Nation land. It's also Osage. It's also, this was a sundown town among many other sundown towns in this area, which means that Black people were not allowed to stay the night in this area. And also my family history, we might have some family members closer to this history, like is tied up with the Indian boarding school that happened in this area too. And that there's a lot of complex defiance and complicity and trauma and romance, and all of it's very mixed together. And I bring this up because as we think about permaculture and the prime directive of permaculture, we have to, one of I'll just say the prime directive of permaculture is we take all ethical decisions are about taking responsibility for our existence on the planet and that of our children. And so part of that is not just our choices right now, but also turning around and taking responsibility for the choices that our ancestors have made and trying to do the next right thing in all of those regards. So I don't have any big answers now, but that's just by way of introduction. That's why I'm here. So the place that I run here is called Stardust Market Garden, and it is certified organic now, but there's a lot of different techniques that I will go over as I go through the slides. So you'll see more and more pictures of it. And let's see here. And this is one of the in-person permaculture design courses that I've done. And so there's Kayla as a little baby. And I will go more into what a permaculture design course is, but just so you know, it tends to be, if it's in person, like a 2-week long or a 3-week long curriculum deep dive. And then I do lots of mentoring besides that. And yes, and then also before I leave this slide, there's a few things, like one of the Lori mentioned that I on the board for lead agency. So one of the ways that I see of giving back is to be the lead agency is a nearby nonprofit that focuses on water quality because of the historic mining that's happened in this area. It's also happens to be a lot of tribal people run that organization. So as a nod to Danny's talk last month, or last couple of weeks ago, where she talked about giving back to helping with water quality and tribal-led efforts, that's one of the ways I give back. And I also can usually figure out how any Black or Indigenous people who are interested in permaculture can be taking permaculture courses for free or very reduced. That's part of the work too. So, and then another thing before I leave this slide too is I would like to, since we're all here, I would like to give just a big shout out and thank you to my mom, because I don't think that she planned this for the future that I would have. But this course in particular, this picture, I was able to teach this course because she was there taking Hala on walks while I was teaching lectures. And that while I was pregnant, in the permaculture course I taught just before this, her and Tom came down to bring me groceries halfway through. And in the course that followed this, a North American permaculture convergence in Minnesota, she actually went with me to help with Hala's childcare so that I could do all of this connecting with colleagues and things like that. And they have been to many permaculture sites. It's nice to be able to bring this together to the church community. So let's go back to this one. So this is, sure, go ahead. So Zoom has this new feature where you can actually grab this and zoom in if you want to, but this is artwork done for The Fifth Sacred Thing. The Fifth Sacred Thing is a fictional book by Starhawk, and a big theme of it is what happens when permaculture is applied to cities. And I won't get into the whole plot line of everything, but I just wanted to start by taking a look at this picture and really just like letting it settle in and just noting all these different things about it. So people who are scared of what climate change, what might mean, might say things like, we're gonna have to sit in dark houses and be cold, and the elites are gonna make us, bugs. If there's any conspiracy theories about any of that stuff that you've heard about, like I would love to talk about them, or just like that it's gonna be like miserable to live in a world that's so changed to adapt to climate change. And what I see here is not miserable at all, but very, very captivating. And I think this is primarily the vision of what we can do together. I should say willingly. I think a lot of people get really afraid of like, oh, the government and these global elites are going to make us do this, but it's like willingly, a lot of people might choose this kind of lifestyle, less cars, more gardens, more community. And that was really drew me into permaculture. So I actually learned about permaculture in high school from asking a science teacher, like, how are humans supposed to live on the planet? Because what I saw happening, in the suburb I was living at was not a life that I was interested in living. So anyway, let's see here. And then I'll just say for just to give you guys an overview, how this is going to work is I'm going to go through a bunch of techniques, and then we're going to pause a little bit, and I'm going to start sharing specifics about Samish Island, and I'll bring in Dean and maybe Christine if she's here too. But we'll just kind of pop through that way. I already saw that one. Okay, so this, the hockey stick graph is familiar to you all. You've seen different versions of this and all the different speakers. And so what I want to point out to you is the creative response, what we call energy descent in permaculture. So a lot of the techniques, that I'd say are more widely in the news are what we might call techno-stability. We're going to just figure out some industrial change for like some big machine is going to be sucking carbon, or some big thing in industry is going to change. Or what I think a lot of us are afraid of is that won't work, and that we'll have very hungry people who will not be able to have clean water. This is already happening. This kind of collapse is already happening around the world in different communities. And so permaculture kind of comes in with this middle path here, saying, maybe we don't need as much industrial culture. Maybe a lot of our consumption is too much anyway. Maybe we're overdeveloped in some places, in some nations, and that actually the response can be something of like less industrial culture and more community. And so that's a willingly not using as much energy as we do now. So I'll just leave it at that. And then I also want to apologize. There's a lot of things on my slides where I might not even talk about it, but I'm just trying to give an overview. And if we get into like a Q&A is totally great too as we go through this, because there's no way that I can tell you all about how permaculture works. So just having an overview that's even Q&A based is fine too. And so you'll see as I start to go through it. But there'll be many slides where I will not read everything. All right. So apologies to anyone who's scared of spiders. I put this picture up because this is a picture of our site here. This is a garden spider. So she eats grasshoppers. This is Malabar spinach. So it's a spinach that's really well adapted to growing in the summer and the heat. We've had droughts here where there's some plants that are surviving, but the only thing growing is this Malabar spinach. And then what you see is the flowers here, where it also makes its own seeds, it drops them. I never have to replant this. So this is a whole system that I also see as like the spider is relaxing. So that means a lot to me too. It's like, how do we create these systems where we can also be relaxed into the abundance that we're living in? So the word permaculture comes from the amalgam of the words permanent and agriculture. If you think about permanence in ecology in nature, then that doesn't really happen. So the word permanent in this sense is that we could plan to not annihilate ourselves as a species. So what kind of agriculture would we have? What kind of culture would we have if we were planning to not annihilate ourselves? And I know that seems really big, but like you all know, because you've been part of these conversations, that we are headed for like, just at the very least, a maximum rudeness to our descendants by leaving the planet with them without cleaning it up. Or we could be designing in systems that really work for the people in the future too. So, and let's see here. A design system for landscapes that integrates, just gonna move this here, and restores place-based ecology while meeting human needs. So another way to think about that is like food, shelter, water, community. What do we need? What is our human habitat, and how can we meet that? And it's also a curriculum that teaches this design to the industrial influenced humans. If you look at this main definition, like a design system for landscapes that integrates, all this, like people across the world have been doing this for thousands of years. Indigenous people have a closer relationship with it. And so it's not like permaculture is not anything new. the new part might be this curriculum that fits with people who have been industrialized, but other cultures have different ways of passing on this curriculum too. And then I just end with common sense. A friend of mine who's indigenous, who come over to a permaculture place that I lived at for a couple of years, she'd watch what we were doing and just like, oh, this is common sense. And then I was listening to a podcast yesterday with another indigenous permaculture leader, and she actually mentioned common sense too. So I think that's a great way of putting it too. If only sense was more common. So, all right. Okay, so I'm going to show a big list here. And yeah, Q&A throughout if you have it. What I'm taking is we're putting together a puzzle of how all of these techniques with permaculture, the puzzle of how all these techniques work, if it's appropriate to a site, where it would fit in the site, how it would fit in the site, and what priority it is. So it's often easier for me to show this, and then you'll start catching on. So, and then I'm going to show this briefly. We're not going to go through all this. We're not going to read all this. This is just lifted from a permaculture design course, the last one I posted on my website. And so this is just like, bam, all of these things. So it's like, don't you wish in high school you had a day just to learn about how water works and how nature cleans water, and then another day to learn how like soils work and how composting works? And so a lot of this is really it's accessible to even very young students who take a permaculture design course. And the idea is not that you know everything about all these topics by the time we get through it, but that you have an idea of like that there's so many solutions, and that we have an idea of what those solutions are and that we can fit them together. So I'll get away from that. That was a lot of words, right? So another theme for this slideshow will just be like all the great stuff that my daughter gets to do. So observation, it sounds really basic, but there's no way to care for a site on the earth without knowing deeply about that site on the earth. And so this photo is just like I had set a chair out here because we've been trying to figure out where the ducks were laying their eggs. And my daughter asked, you know, like try to get her to do stuff outside. And I was like, go watch the ducks. And so there's a lot of in permaculture, there's all these terminology for different ways of sitting and learning from the natural world that's going on around us, whether we're keeping a journal every day or like more advanced skills for reading the landscape. And I would just say, like for my birthday last year, Hayla and I ended up, you know, we heard a clacking sound in the bushes, and there were some turtles having sex. So we were sitting there watching how this was unfolding. And then we saw some Baltimore Orioles that were baby chicks. They were being pushed out of their nest and learning how to fly. So we spent like 3 or 4 hours just watching all of this. And so it's also about adapting our attention spans to the speed of what is going on around us, and realizing that there's these very profound things that are happening every day that are telling us more and more and more about our site. Sometimes people ask, oh, what's the best way to do, you know, a gray water system or a food forest? And there is no answer for that without knowing how a specific site works. So I'll just leave that. The sniffing the air just comes from the hobbits mentioned that they go outside in the evening to sniff the air. So it's a reference to some Tolkien there. Let's see, I'll go to the next one. So how nature works. So we have what's called permaculture principles, permaculture patterns, and the idea is that with a lot of nature observation, then we kind of get these shorthand views of like how to think about different systems and what's going on within different systems. The photo here is Hayla with her friend, and they were looking at bugs. You'll see Hayla's age changes a lot through these photos. But one of the strategies with having a lot of pollinators in your garden is that you actually always want some, well, pollinators and then beneficial insects, is that you always want some kind of pests in a garden, because then your predator insects have a home. And so you never want to eliminate anything out of the system entirely. So I'm not going to read through all these, but the system is as strong as its relationships. Like the example might be, you can go buy ladybugs from the store as beneficial insects and release them, and then they might just all fly away. So you have to have all of these other relationships and plants and water and habitat in place, and then the system starts to sync together and to work. Let's see. Another interesting one to think about is the problem is the solution. It's kind of like this motto in permaculture, and it means that whatever made the problem, even something as big as climate change, the solution is obvious within however that problem was made. And so for climate change, you can think of like, oh, like, you know, like, have we gotten depressed from not having enough community and not having enough reasons to work together and having too much industrial culture? That solution might be embedded within the problem itself. Yeah, a lot of these are just, you know, nature works with diversity and redundancy. There's multiple ways that a plant can get nutrients. There's multiple things that a bird can eat. And so we're trying to develop our systems this way. All right, so local traditional knowledge. So all people have at one point have ancestors who know how to live on the earth. This is a photograph of us leaching acorns. And so people around the world have eaten acorns for a long time. You can leach it like this, have water flow through it, and then grind it into flour. And one of my proudest moments as a parent was when I walked into the bathroom and saw that Hala had filled up the bathroom sink with acorns and was leaching them in the sink. So not the best, you never want to combine food, you know, in the bathroom. But as far as like, this kid knows how things work and how to survive, that was a nice feeling for me. So the more, let's see, how do I describe this? The more I'm in touch with my own ancestry as far as how they used plants, the more I can collaborate with, you know, whatever people I'm meeting, whether it's Cherokee here, you know, or Osage or Irish, you know. And so I'm really looking forward to, we're going to go to Norway later this year and to learn about how the traditional plants and the traditional ecosystems, their work makes me a stronger permaculture designer for here, because I'm thinking about how it all, how to collaborate respectively. So, and then, I mean, it just shows I'm not a purist, because all the stuff I do, it's like I'm still going to be flying, you know. And so as far as my carbon footprint, you just gotta do what you can. So, but this part of the course is really like doing that deep dive into like what food grows naturally in your ecosystem, what medicine grows naturally, and then what are the practices that have been kept up through time that maintain it. And more, when I started in permaculture, there was not so much an emphasis on prescribed burns and fires, but that is becoming more and more a part of that management practice and learning how to do that. All right. So orientations, let's see. What I'm trying to show here is how these garden beds are built on contour. So I'm standing, let's see here. I'm taking a photo from right here, looking this direction. And so the town, like, how do I describe this? So this town, this is where I live, Fairland. The town is oriented towards a rail line. And, but if you could see, there's a few buildings that are oriented towards the south. And so this building, which my great uncle actually built, and then my high tunnel right here. And so as we're learning about landscapes, it kind of like takes this brain shifting to think about like, oh, how the earth thinks about buildings and our sites is not necessarily how we think about it, especially when we're driving cars a lot. And so how do we orient our site and our houses for like where the wind comes in, where the sun comes in, how the slope of the land works? And this is like, I mentioned, you know, I'm in the Ogeechee Creek watershed that drains to the Neosho. That would be part of my natural address. And so knowing what your natural address is as far as the systems that connect to the site that you're at. And then also I should finish describing this photo, but you can see here that there's these lines, and those actually are like showing as you go down a slope, these are the contour lines. And so that way, whenever water travels down the slope, it is held in the pathways so that more water is hydrating the land and it has less of a need for irrigation. Whereas if I built off of slope in any kind of direction, then that's going to be more erosive. It's not going to hold fertility as much. It's not going to hold water as much, and it will demand more and hurt the earth more. And so this kind of basic, where are you in your creek shed? And then where are you on the slope? So yeah, let's see here. And then, I mean, just to orient you a little bit, this is these are two of the gardens here. There's more gardens around here that I manage, and then more gardens back in here. All right, I did not take these photos. This came from Maria Bullock over on Orcas Island. But another big theme that humans have across the planet is that they live within patchworks in the forest, or they create patchworks using forest type things, non-timber forest products. So maybe like not big pieces of wood, but how do we think of a lot of the products that we're used to using now, chairs, tables, beds, books, fences, like how can that all come from smaller wood that is harvested sustainably and that also reinvigorates and regenerates places in the land where it is harvested. So trying to kind of got in a lot of words there. So I'll pause a little bit, but basically that there's this pattern over time where humans create a patchwork, and then as that grows, there's certain kinds of products that come from it, and then and then there's another patchwork where those products are slightly larger or slightly more established, and then another patchwork with even larger stuff. So if anyone is familiar with buying fruit trees, the phrase standard or semi-dwarf, those kind of trees all have to do with where in that patchwork they fit in. And then at some point the system is started again, whether it's through slash and burn or swidden or management of some kind through bison. And so this is more of like, how do we think of the products that we need for living and how they can be gained from not necessarily ever needing to destroy any big forest. Bamboo would fit into this as well. So I'll just go to the next one. So I have this slide as far as the soil management one, because throwing a bunch of sunflower seeds on the ground is a great way to start a garden. Here's the roof line, just for context for how tall this sunflower is. So, and I like this slide for talking about soil management because there's no soil that we see here, but you could tell that the soil is being managed really well by all these diversity of plants. And so, and when we do the permaculture course, there's a whole day on how do we have all of this different kinds of composting, all of these different kinds of mulching. How do you encourage fungi to be growing along with garden plants, and what are the fungi doing? What are innovative ways to use the plants that are coming up, and whether they're like a weed that needs to be fully eradicated or a weed that needs to be eaten or a weed that needs to be harvested at a certain time of year to be medicine. So lots about this, basically letting life. There's a phrase that we use, that everything gardens. And so what does that mean? It's like the chicken creates its own kind of garden. It's managing, it's eating, it's fertilizing. A pig creates its own kind of garden, and a human creates its own kind of garden. So here she's a little bit younger. So for water management, it's thinking about how do we stay within our water budget. So picturing like how much rainfall does your site get? How big are your roofs? How long is your dry season? How can you hold that water and incorporate it into the landscape so that you never have, you can think of that as like, if you think of water as like a bank account, then like the water that falls on you is just living off the interest. And that ideally we never really have to go deep into like our savings or our, ancestor savings in order to pull water up in a way that often makes it more polluted before we send it back out into the landscape. So there's also like reusing water from the house in different ways into the landscape according to like what's clean and what's safe. Yeah, modern catchwords, rain gardens, green stormwater infrastructure, And let's see here. I should want to say though that like this kind of big sprinkler system is not going to work with cisterns. There's not that kind of pressure, that kind of head. It just happened to be stored there for when the photo was taken. But it's more of like figuring out how we can run drip systems or very small manageable irrigation systems from water that we're holding. All right, annuals. Let's see here. So in the webinars that I've heard from you all, it's like, I just felt like no farmer or agriculturist has really said like, it's not the increase in temperatures that's the hard thing about growing food. It's that we never know what's coming. It like the extreme temperatures, swinging back and forth wildly, the storms, that's just a totally weird scenario. Like before, a few years ago, I'd never heard of heat dome, never heard of derecho, you know, like, so that's what makes growing food really difficult with climate change. This photo, I have so many garden pictures, but this one showed something newer that I'm trying, which is that basically this is a drought garden and the cat is demonstrating where to walk on the paths. And so the areas like here, those are all sunken down and the path is above it. So it's kind of like raised beds in reverse. Think of like a waffle or something. And so one of my gardens is like this, so that in times of drought, I have a really easy place where it's like, I can mulch it really well. I could do some soaker hoses if need be, even though I try to irrigate as little as possible. But I have a place that's set up to always handle extreme heat. But not every year is extreme heat. Sometimes it's extremely wet. And so I have other gardens where it's more raised. So having a diversity of kinds of gardens and a diversity of microclimates is really like lets you plan for just all the craziness that we're facing with climate change. And then also, as I'm talking about annuals, it should be said that a lot of these systems can happen without like everybody needing to be a gardener or even, you know, everybody needing to do anything like this. That I feel like there's so many neighborhoods where it's like there's enough unused space that someone in the community can be doing some gardening. There's someone in the community who can be having some goats. There's someone in the community who can have chickens. And so I'd be hard pressed, even Seattle, like with single family homes, as most of those neighborhoods, like I feel has plenty of space. So an idea that talks about in permaculture is like, what if we didn't pay landscapers and we didn't pay for our food, but we had someone who grew food in all the places and we paid that person, you know, because not everybody wants to garden. So what else should I say here? So in a lot of food growing and permaculture, we think about what successional stage is that piece of land at? So annual, like if we think of successions, like bare field to shrubs to trees next to a forest edge to like bigger forest. Agriculture now is a lot of tilling and keeping that all at the very beginning stage of succession, whereas it's more resilient and multi-yielding when we start mixing up which successional stage we're having our agriculture happen at. So obviously something like this, I'm still starting, you know, with bare soil, but I tend to do a lot of polyculture. Like there'll be one kind of crop on the ground, another crop that's kind of midway up, and another crop that's an overstory, even if it's just all annual production. Okay, and then getting into perennials. So this is Hala in a mulberry tree, and the idea is like in a lot of ways, you just want to be able to go out into your landscapes and shove your face full of food. So again, with the patchworks of forest or annuals, but also tweaking that idea that most of our fruit berries, most of our fruit trees, some of our nuts, it's really that forest edge area that is the most productive. And so how do we have patchworks of low areas and middle places and taller areas within even our urban landscapes? Yeah, let's see what else to say about that. There's just a lot of ways to incorporate perennials. What can we not do is a phrase we sometimes use, whether it's with the annuals or this one. And one of my favorite examples of that lately is I've been wanting to have some more black walnuts here, but they're kind of persnickety to plant because they have a taproot. And I happened to collect a bunch of black walnuts from a place in town that had like the oldest black walnut tree. And I dumped them in the driveway because what you're supposed to do is drive over them to get rid of that hard husk. And then you have just the shell to deal with. And then I forgot about it. But there's this squirrel that's been very busily taking every single walnut from that area and every few feet around the site, digging in these walnuts everywhere. So clearly I can't grow all those nuts, but it was a great example of like, oh, because this is a functional system, I'll be able to pick and choose which walnuts I want to keep. The squirrel is doing all the work. Like at one point I felt bad because I was like, I could dump some more walnuts there, but then the squirrel might be just too exhausted. So he's really, it's different from other years where I haven't dumped walnuts. He's going into a lot more gardens where he doesn't usually go. So let's see here. And then I guess one note here is that sometimes people think, oh, there's some vacant land. We want to have some kind of garden. But doing annuals, like staying like in the early stages of succession, is a lot more work. It's a lot weedier. It's a lot more seasonal dependent. And it might make sense to do something more like fruit trees or nut trees or something that's on the more perennial end of the succession in order to like take a vacant lot and do something beautiful with it and something food producing with it, but not have that much work too. All right, seeds and propagation. I don't have to stay here too much. These are, Kayla's actually got a wheelbarrow load of peanuts here. And I like peanuts I couldn't grow in the Northwest, but they are super exciting crop because they fix nitrogen and they're a ground cover. And then of course it's great to grow protein, something like you can actually eat in major quantities in your garden rather than just like salads, you know. But peanuts aside, like there's just a lot of different ways that you can be propagating plants and seed saving. Part of the permaculture curriculum is like, what are all the different things you have to think about when you're seed saving? What do terms like heirloom and hybrid and GMO, what do they mean? And so I think I'll just leave it at that. There's a very cute YouTube video on my channel where there's some kids, Hala included, describing all sorts of like ways to propagate plants. Do you even remember making that?
When was it?
It was a few years ago. So I will move on from that. So animals in the system. This is Coralie and Hala. So so the funny thing about these turkeys that walked off is like, that's because I walked over there to take a picture. But before, they're all just, you know, the humans or the kids, human kids, and the turkeys were all just hanging out very beneficially in this orchard. And so when we hear about animals not working with climate change, a lot of the time it's like because we have a really bad industrial system for those animals. Like we have too many cows in some kind of confined animal feeding operation where their poop is becoming a toxin rather than something that is healthily used in the landscape. And so, but if you're talking about neighborhood scale, animals that you might know or that someone you know knows, and eating less of them, then incorporating them into landscapes is actually very key. Without manure, then our fertility cycles start to get really much more difficult. Of course, there is cover cropping, there is like home composting, but in traditional systems, like the animals and the crops work together. And so, yeah, it's like a longer place of conversation about like methane and manure, but suffice it to say, like eating less meat and having it be more something that fits into your local ecosystem is totally workable over time. And then I will say that pulses of animals moving through your system, whether it's called any of these things, is the pattern that we're usually going for. An animal just stuck in one place over time isn't good for that site and isn't good for the animal. Okay, appropriate technology. So on this one, I mean, like a story that I think it simplifies this is I got a little raise, I had a little bit more money. I was thinking about getting photovoltaic panels, but instead I decided to get efficient blinds because it's like, first I need to tighten up all of my places where I might be losing energy, wasting energy, and then I'll think about replacing it with some kind of electricity. That makes sense. So you guys have talked about this here, but like that the just becoming more efficient with the energy I'm using is a lot more bang for your buck, even though it's maybe not as exciting. So This is a solar oven. I've heard other people mention solar ovens in this webinar before. I'm not going to read all of this, but it's just really exciting to think about what's the tool that you need to use, and is there a way to do it without electricity? And often there is, whether it's like a cuckoo clock where you just have gravity run the cuckoo clock, or like we're keeping time over here with one of these, right? Little hourglass, like there's so many techniques that don't need to be electricity based. Yeah, I'd love to answer questions about any of this, but I'm just not gonna read it. So, ecological building. The most ecological house is a shared house. And so that makes it really simple, because there's all sorts of cool things you can do, all sorts of like, adobe or cob or straw bale kind of things. But if you're really trying to figure out like, or as communities, we're really trying to figure out how to make our structures more efficient, the biggest thing you can do is just figure out how to have housemates that you can live with, and how to get along and have more people using the resources that are already built. So I wanted to say that before going into all of this, which again is like design first, so that we're not needing the grid for as many things as we currently do. Instead of like just thinking about plugging things in, how can our house be oriented in the right direction, and what kind of windows and what kind of doorways make sense, that kind of thing. And there's quite a few church members who actually have really cool houses. I'm pointing to Jody and Woody as like an earth bermed house. The Sundells have like a passive solar house, and Cheyenne, Ralph and Nancy Williston, if anybody knows them, they have a passive house, kind of earth bermed house near Independence. And so yeah, that it was interesting just thinking of all the people I knew who are already doing this within the church. What more to say about that? What we're doing here, this photo, which I should describe, is a straw bale house, very big one that a friend of ours is building in the Ozarks. So the kids were helping that. No such thing as waste. This is just rainwater, so it's not a super good example, but what I'm showing is there's different tiers of use, and this happens with lots of different things, whether it's vegetation for the garden, whether it's human waste of some kind, whether it's rainwater. I mean, basically, like this water caught from the roof can be sent out in the drip system to plants that are over this way, or it can overflow here where there's fish and there's water plants, and I can dip water out of here to also have fish fertilized water to use on the crops. Or if that overflows, then there's a whole other tier of plants that can go to, and then even outside after it leaves the high tunnel. So it's like that kind of tier of use is what we're going for with waste. So using it for the highest, best use for it at that stage, and then as it maybe gets dirtier or less manageable, having it go to different kinds of things. And yeah, I might just leave it at that. We have a very broken cycle today, where we have a lot of things that have nutrients becoming garbage, and then we're taking very clean water. I mean, the classic example is why we have potable water filling our toilet bowls is unimaginable, right? You would think about like, how can we instead have clean water go to things like hand washing, and then that water is dirty, and then it would go into a toilet bowl. So things like that. Okay. Emergency preparedness. There's another photo. So this is kind of like where all the water cleaning, food growing, waste reduction, seed saving strategies, everything that permaculture teaches, like how it all fits together into an emergency scenario. And so this is usually near the end of the course. And I have taught a course at a university setting where they learned all these techniques about how to do all this different kinds of composting, all these seed saving. And then we were talking with the emergency director at this university and asked, well, what would you do with human waste? If the grid was down, if there was nothing, some disaster, some earthquake happened, and he was like, oh, well, we would just put it in plastic bags and throw it in a hole and set the hole on fire every so often. And the class was totally aghast at like this use of plastic, this waste of resources, this like toxic minefield that some other people would have to deal with at some point. And so this is when a lot of permaculture stuff really becomes super helpful, is that there's really safe, clear ways of doing a lot of this different stuff. Sorry, I did not describe the picture. This is like March 2020 when there's this scare about not having toilet paper. It's like, oh, well, we'll just cut up more little rags to use. And so if it's just urine, it can go straight into the washing machine. It's totally sanitary. And yeah, it's just like one small example of like us not needing to use toilet paper and still have it be perfectly elegant and clean and feel nice. So, and then I guess I would say there's like in a lot of disaster scenarios, I have also done the neighborhood disaster training. I forget what it's called right now, but you have to plan for like, okay, you might not get any help for 24, 48 hours. And that like, how do you respond fast without knowing that like anyone is coming to help you, is like, you also just have your strategies down and that you know you can do it. And so that's where permaculture really comes in with like, I know how to clean water in a pinch, you know, I know how to do all of these different things. And that the more people know that kind of thing, the less the less emotional turmoil there will be for people, which is really important. Okay, almost done with this part. So designing for community. And this is like, how do we learn to live together more, but also in a way that like we really love and that really nourishes us. And so again, I won't read all of this, but I think something, you know, that's really valid for this community is like kind of like how we feel at camp, you know, that it like, maybe you get sick of people at camp. I don't know that I ever did, but it's kind of like you see everyone for more meals, you're seeing them throughout the day, you have your own private space, but you can collaborate more, and that we can have neighborhoods that function more like that. I highlighted the word solutionary rail as a term that especially anyone in Washington, Oregon can research, and city repair out of Portland. These are just innovative ways of thinking about our you know, like how are we producing energy as communities? How are we creating spaces within our cities so that it meets our needs better? And, you know, like, do we need as much TikTok and social media if we actually have, you know, someone down the street playing the guitar, you know, that kind of thing. And then invisible structures. Those are the things that are not as tangible, but really make or break a lot of systems. And so like, what are the legal agreements between people? How does, you know, property work or land access? You know, like how are decisions made? Who gets to decide different kinds of things? Certifications of trust is like what I choose to, it's tricky to always just figure out what's a photograph you could share of invisible structures. But when you walk into a place, you don't see the insurance, you don't see the taxes, you don't see the certification, but you experience it in some kind of way. And so how do we stumble our way through all of these things to make everything else from the systems work? So there's a phrase that the gardens are the easy part. It's usually this kind of stuff or communities getting along that is the stuff that's harder to you know, much harder than planting plants and trees. Let's see here. Okay, we got through that part. So we're going to take a little pause. And I'm going to just bring up something to think about to switch gears a bit. And let's see. So I started looking at doing a design for Samish Island. And then it struck me like how strange it is to even be playing around with the thought of a design when I feel like all the stakeholders are not present. Namely that like the Samish tribe is there and very, it's, you know, it's so cool. It's so cool that the campground folks are sharing the places of the cemetery and sharing the community garden and all these places. But I wanted to sit and have to do this experiment with you guys of what would it feel like to have land taken away or have to walk away from land that we love. And I know this is a really present question right now within the church community with losing the Kirtland Temple, but of just like, what does it feel like when a place that we have put so much love and energy into, so much of our family history, and then have that land taken away, or to have to walk away from that land. Just gonna pause for a second. And this could be like something you could put in the chat, or just think about it yourself. And if you need to pop up and go to the bathroom or get some water, this might be a good pivot. And I'm going to go through like my initial thoughts, picturing that I would have to leave, like even this site that I put a lot of time into. It's like entitlement comes up, but I earned it, but I work hard, but it's mine. But I worry about my children if I don't, have this land that I helped cultivate. And that gives me a lot of compassion for the people who have been forced off their land or been forcibly taken away. And then from the other, like hopefully, let's see, if we're not, if there's a few different things I can see here. I'm just going to check the chat in a minute. Yes. Yeah. And I also echo that part of how I came into permaculture teaching was that I was a renter, or I was just, asking different people to use pieces of garden here or there, or turn places into gardens. And so I lost garden after garden after garden. I would get so upset with, especially if it's like, oh, I put in this garden and then someone asked me to move in June, just before it starts. But then realizing that that's just a little piece of what it feels like for, picture being Indigenous, maybe some of you are, of like having that family history built up over generations and then being taken away, or being forced off of land that, forced to, move across the planet somewhere else, away from all the land that you know. So I think that's a really rich feeling for myself, just to get in touch with that, my own like anger or entitlement about it, because it also gives me a place of feeling great compassion for the people who've had to lose land, and of taking that feeling and making it more productive as far as doing the next right thing. So, and then what gives me hope with this, there's these three questions that follow it, is that, for the people who have, land to share, how do we decide to share land? What does that feel like for us? And then do we feel better or worse because of it? And I just wanted to lean into that here, because knowing that the Samish campground is sharing more and more land, I feel like that feels a lot better, so I'm not sure how that landed Dean, but I know I wanted to like toss it to Dean for a minute now, just to give us kind of like bring us up to date before I go into all sorts of Samish campground specifics about what is the relationship right now. And I'm gonna check the chat.
Great. Let me just, I'm getting an echo here and I'm not sure why.
Here, I'll mute myself in case that's part of it.
What I'd like to do is just talk a bit about Samish Island. And for those of you who haven't figured this out, the next part here for our last little while, we're going to try to kind of a thought experiment to think about how would we apply these concepts and techniques that Kelda has walked us through to a particular sacred space. And because many of us know Samish Island, Kelda knows Samish Island campground, we thought that would be a good example to use. Samish Island is a particular sacred space as a campground that is owned by the Community of Christ on Samish Island in Northwest Washington State. And so as we go through a process of thinking about this one, those of you who live in other places and have other sacred campground spaces, think about how these kinds of approaches and this overall systems view of how life can be organized might apply to sacred spaces that are part of your life and part of your communities. Now, our campground in particular is a space that connects us across generations and draws us into community. Young families who find it difficult to connect through congregations still value in their children's and families' camp experiences the opportunity to be together in those places. We're going to have Kelda present a perspective on Samish Island. And as we listen to Kelda posing questions and features that go into permaculture design for this particular space, consider who the stakeholders are for this space and for your sacred spaces. Whose voices should be a part of the design conversation? What values should we uphold? How do our enduring principles enter into the planning? At Samish, we are increasingly aware of the way in which the land and surrounding Salish Sea sustained the indigenous coast Salish peoples, and how they can help us rediscover how their practices can be regenerative for all living inhabitants. As you'll see, Samish Island is at the connection of river and sea, of shoreline and upland, and is home to critical and threatened species of both flora and fauna. Nurtured lovingly, it provides sustenance for its inhabitants. As the people of the Samish Indian nation say, when the tide is out, the table is set. So, Kelda, how would you like to proceed in terms of having a permaculture design conversation for this space?
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get over to GIS where I've been doing some, I'm going to share a different screen. And Dean and actually whoever else knows Samish, you might just sit with me and see here. Sorry. Zoom. Why just okay. All right. So to bring you guys up to speed, let's see here. In white is the Samish Island property, and frustratingly, it's going to move a little slower than usual because I'm sharing my screen. But you see the main contours of the site, that it's on an island that you drive through to, and there's these contours show a steep drop off, but the campground that we mostly know is all this use in here, but the property lines go all the way up into here. And so let's see, I didn't want to leave people out who didn't know Samish, and so I'm just going to start with let's see, main structures here. So I'm going to do that. So the dining hall, the cabins, the classrooms, the CFC. So that orients you a little bit.
The
So
CFC
what we
worship center, yes.
Yes, thank you. I don't want to get into the acronyms, but one of the things we do with permaculture design first is look at what influences are coming into the site. And so here, the main thing you feel about the site is this amazing view out this direction. This line denotes the summer sun. So from here, the summer sunrise on June 21st will be out here and the sunset will be here. December 21st, the sunrise is here and the sunset is here. This green is the wildlife coming out. Actually, I can show you guys there. Wildlife is mostly going to come from the forest. Samish tribal relation is there hanging out down here. There's a village there, and then the visitors and most people arriving will be arriving from that direction. That's kind of the entrance. So that's just to orient you to what we call sectors. And actually, while you're here, Dean, so with sectors, other questions would be, where's the main wind direction? Because I can look up the wind direction on the internet, but because this is such a coastal property, it's going to be totally different than how it would be if it was more inland. So I don't know if Christine ever told you that. Or if there's other influences like, you know, other sectors might be bad smells or a neighbor that really doesn't like us, or, you know, like something, you know, garbage washing up on the shore, anything that we can't control, that's coming onto the site. Can you think of anything I left out here?
Well, one thing I think is that on the southern edge of the property there, that angled line that runs across, yes, right there. Across the street is a row of homes, private homes, and a few of which have also become, you know, Airbnb kinds of places. And so one of our constant efforts is to work with those property owners and those inhabitants around how to have positive relationships and in reasonable sharing of the use of the property with our
Yeah,
neighbors. The other
yeah,
issue is, I think the wind primarily comes either from the north, coming way out of the Fraser Valley up to the north from Canada, or from the south and southwest. Although certainly we get wind that comes in from the east as well. We're shielded from the wind by the forest, I think, in terms of the actual properties. And
yeah. But then, I mean, I'm going to jump ahead, but then it's like, we know, or for myself, I know it mostly in summertime. In winter, it might be a totally different thing as far as which wind direction is most impactful.
sure.
I'm going to take off the contours here and go to area overview. I'm just going to speed things up a little bit. So in red, I kept the main structures, and then where most people will be sleeping the night is also in a reddish tone. And then everything in orange is a place that people kind of go to. You know, the basketball court, kind of the lab, depending on your age. Yellow is not as much interaction. This is getting into what we call permaculture zones in a second. And the purple I kind of left is like, not many people have reason to go there, except for, you know, if we're fixing something up in the cemetery, and then also the community garden up there. So that overviews into what we call zones. So let's show that. And so this is a way of being really efficient with our design. And so you can see most people who know Samish Island, like this area in red, we go back and forth between here all day long. And that's pretty much could be your full experience of camp, with occasionally going to a campfire or occasionally like going for a walk around the lake. And Dean, I'm apologizing, but I'm going to like try to speed things up. So chime in whenever you see like, ooh, 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 kind of thing. So also I'm going to take off the zones and show you what the microclimate. So this is kind of like, I'm going to take off that one too. So this is showing deep forest, sunny forest edge, shady forest edge. So the north side of the forest, even if it's out in the field, we'll get more shade because of the trees being there. And then in permaculture, we have something called sun traps, which is places that face south in this hemisphere and actually catch a lot of the sun. So it's really interesting that the zone where a lot of people spend a lot of time is also one of the most sheltered, sunniest zones on the site. And then we have a lot of wet meadows in here and riparian areas. I think I'm gonna go. Okay, so actually I'm gonna stop this share and go to what's called a SWOT. Sorry, back here again. There we go. So through looking at the lens of like the zones, the microclimates, I could also look at the soils. I can also look at the contours. I can do a client interview to get to know the site. This gives us a lot of design ideas. And so I can't read them all, but you can glance at like, okay, like that is happening, or maybe you disagree. That's totally fine too. I mean, a big one is pulses of large amount of people for shorter periods of time. I mean, so that can also be a strength. That's a lot of eaters. That's a lot of people using water. Opportunities. There's so many. It was like I just had to fill out the page and then stop, you know, so the text didn't get too small. But there's natural places for gathering, natural places for privacy. So this kind of analysis is what I would do after going through and analyzing the structure of a site. So I'm going to stop this share and go back into this one. Let's see here, and maybe toggle some of these off, because the design ideas I get from doing that SWOT. Wait a minute. Turn that one off. Okay, here we go. Is to think about these things: site care, earth care, trees and gardens, and emergency preparedness. And so site care is like, what about this specific site should we be looking out for? Okay. I was checking my time. So there's caring for the earth in general, and then there's caring for the site. And some of the weaknesses I saw is that the forest edges, anywhere there's a forest edge, is where you could potentially have more rampant or invasive species. And I've done plant walks here when I was a camp counselor once. And so I know that there's a lot of like weedier plants in these areas. So one of the main things we can do as stewards is to care for that edge. And that means putting plants that we want to grow there or that should grow there, more native plants or plants that we're tending, like more fruit plants. And so there's a lot of forest edge to work with in this area. And then care of the coastal areas was another one where there's possible erosion. So we want to make sure that we have plants taking care of all of the slopes, taking care of all of the forest edges. And then potential that I also saw was massive amounts of rainwater harvesting could be done. You know, that's at the CFC and the dining hall, as well as using gray water. One of the easiest ways to reuse water from a house or a structure is with washing machines, because washing machines have a pump that can send it out into the landscape, even if it's not downhill. But this area here is just downhill from the dining hall and isn't used very much. And so that could be, if it doesn't damage the slope, a good place for gray water gardens with water that's from the washing machines that are there, or potentially some of the dishes and things like that too. So, and then non-toxic solutions, I kind of did, like, I'm not sure, you know, what detergents are used, what household products, what pesticides are used on the site. That's what I pictured. The driveway and kind of dining hall would be the main area where we would do like an audit of like, can we have less chemicals being used, especially if we're going to be sending water out into the landscape. Okay. Trying to like, I want to be able to like talk about this with all you besides just present it. So I'm going to toggle off the specific site care and go more to the earth care. And this is where we think about how much energy we're using. And I saw some really basic opportunities right away, which is like, there's a lot of places for obvious photovoltaic access, solar panel access. And one of the cool things is that because we tend to cluster parking in here, having places where people could plug in electrical vehicles to get charged is great, as well as there's not that the cabins don't actually need so much electricity. And so the idea of maybe having a portable battery that's charged up, you know, at the CFC and then walked back to the cabin for use at night, like that's totally possible for the people who would want it. And then solar hot water is also like being able to make water hot and use it to supplement your water heater without actually ever having to be anything electrical. And so that, because we cluster the bathrooms, it's a really easy place just to make a lot of hot water in specific places. All right.
Let me ask you about, you know, the traditional practice has been to mow that huge area all around the buildings that are used. It consumes a lot of time. It's not necessarily of any other use. What are your thoughts about grass and mowing, in looking at Samish Island in particular?
Yeah, let's go to this one. How about we'll answer that with some obvious places to take some grass out. So let me actually put care of forest edges back on. Okay, so if we were caring for those forest edges and through more scrubby plants that lead up to the forest edge, and then we're capitalizing on, or using, I guess is a better word, the sunnier places for something that we tend to call a snack track here in green, snack track. That could be berries, grapes, something that's like, we tend to walk this area, so we could be having things to snack on, right? That's an easy one. And then the food forest, I like, there's places where lawn is needed because people are walking back and forth. But less lawn could be put in. I mean, look at all this area kind of like by the CFC or where parking doesn't usually go. I think it doesn't go that far, or right by the entrance. That could all be some kind
Septic
of
drain fields there. Those are septic drain fields there,
oh,
below the
like
cabins and below the RV area on the left. Yeah.
oh
And
down
so,
here.
yeah, yeah, that's a septic drain field, and then right south of the cabins as well.
Okay. Well, and then septic drain fields that could be put in wildflowers and be pure, like we'll just give this over to the pollinators, and that kind of aeration is actually really good for septic drain fields too. So adaptation like that. One big one I saw up here, I know a lot of people don't think about this area so much because it's not where we go. This is just in pasture right now. But it's a wet meadow. There's a pasture. But camas is a traditional, really important food for the Coast Salish people. And a lot of tribes are trying to figure out ways that they could just not have their traditional foods at ceremonies and, you know, specific times, but actually just have it for dinner on a Monday night. And so some kind of partnership, maybe not with someone doing pasture, but doing camas would be really cool as well. So, and then wapato, also another traditional food that would probably, you know, yeah, the lake is just a perfect habitat for that. And I don't have time to go into those plants, but I wanted to show one little thing in here where potential agriculture could happen more is that these are the contour lines. And this is why I did some of these green lines here running this direction. This is that they would be, I'll toggle that on and off a couple times just to show why that design would work that way. Yes, but I definitely agree about less lawn. And then the last category I threw in here, let's see, I'm going to declutter this a little bit, is emergency preparedness. But there's so many other things that have been done. There's photovoltaics, there's passive hot water, that the emergency preparedness would be just like, you know, composting toilets, if that kind of system or water system wasn't working for some reason, already set up, already ready to go in a couple of locations. I think I have another one like back here. Emergency water, I put in an emergency water slow sand filter over by the nurses station, and had just an area that we would keep as helicopter access, which is a place that we would want to keep in lawn for massive movement of people anyway. So, anyway, I think I think I could stop now, which is great. So, and again, like, this is just like, this is my brain on Samish Island campground, as far as like, how would you start to piece together all of these different things? It would take a lot of observation, like, yeah, obviously change some of this for the drain fields. I also didn't think, you know, there's a place up in here where I think the dining hall has a septic area, and that when I was thinking about it, I was like, I think that's uphill of the dining hall, where like a photovoltaic panel just that can be specifically set up to pump wastewater to the desired location would be important in case of emergency too. Just like I saw it as a weak link in the system. And so just making sure that pump is working correctly. So what else, Dean?
I was curious about food production because, you know, we buy a lot of food for the camps, and you know, it's all brought in from wherever it's grown. Yeah, just wondering what your thoughts are about what kinds of things might be possible to grow, particularly during the camping season, that would be um, supplemental or even primary to our food planning.
Yeah. And I think that one is mostly like a matter of who would do it. If we had someone with the time to do it, then we would have a place. But if we, you know, certain years there was nobody who wanted to grow a lot of food, then that place could just go back to being wildflowers or lawn. But all of these green areas here, as well as brown, taking out the septic drain field, now that I know exactly where it is, the snack track, that could be all perennials. My favorite thing with perennials is that if there's someone who wants to harvest it, they can. But if there's nobody who wants to harvest it, then it just enriches the soil beneath them, you know, medicinal herbs that someone wants to harvest or not. Oh, I did have herb gardens in here too. Just thinking about herbs that could be grown, you know, that's a good location, or maybe even by the nurses station, herbs that could be grown. so that we do have fresh rosemary and chives and things that people could get. And that doesn't take a lot of use. But like the major food crops like potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, beans, that would take a person who like wants to do it. But I think we have the space and we could have the infrastructure for like, hey, do we have a person who wants to do that this year? Great. You know, does that person also want to organize some work parties during the camp? Yes. If not, like having perennials and all these other places can also be plenty of food. I mean, I'm remembering I can't remember which camp where it's just like we would pick blackberries and then, you know, it would be incorporated into a blackberry cobbler in the dining hall. So
we have about 4 minutes before we need to move into our closing. I wondered if you wanted to take some questions. I don't know whether there have been any in the chat or whether there's a way for people to raise their hand. And
there haven't been any questions in the chat. There have been a few comments, you know, supplementary comments in the chat, but not specific questions. So
okay. So I did want to put this up before I stop talking, which is that I've worked with so many students over the years and have such a permaculture network that one thing I wanted you all to know about is that design kind of like ideas, that's what I train people to do, and that someone could probably do that for your congregation or campground. If you're interested, send me an email and I'll see if I know anyone in my network who's in that area. And especially students, just when they finish a permaculture course, they want to get more they want to get more experience, and so it helps them build up their portfolio to have a good cause to do a design for. So
there is one question now that has come into the chat. I'll just mention it from Lori. There are a lot of blackberry and salmonberry bushes throughout the grounds. They do get harvested and used. Are there other ideas or indigenous possibilities?
So blackberries, they're really, so they're kind of the bane of some people's existence in that area, and I've definitely dug out more the blackberries than I want to, but they create really fertile soil underneath. And a really clever idea I've seen is whacking into some blackberries enough to get a fruit tree or a nut tree in there. And that protects that tree from deer browse. And then once the tree is big enough, it starts shading out the blackberries. And so I also see the blackberries protecting that slope on Samish a lot, which is really important because we don't want erosion happening there. And I would think of the succession of like after the blackberries, what? In which case we can kind of tweak it to be creating a little bit more food or native plants that we want to see grow there. So not much of, I mean, salmonberry, I would just totally leave all of those. You're so good.
How could Samish site and peoples actually support their the river restoration work, not on the site but nearby, of the Samish peoples? So there's river restoration work going on near us, not on our site but near us. How could our site or our people support that work?
I mean, I think that the problem is the solution in like anywhere that has large pulses of people, where some people want to nap in the afternoon and other people might want to get up and go do a thing. Seems like a great way for Samish to plug in, the Samish campground community to plug into, or any campground community to plug in. And also one thing I noted in the SWAT was that there a lot of the campgrounds do have volunteer groups that come out, and diversifying what it is that they're doing might draw different kinds of people or younger people. And so I can see that working.
Okay. One more question. How, and this was not in the chat, but our lake there is a saltwater lake. It's filled from the ocean currents, you know, outside through conduits that come in. We can close those off. We can open those to equalize the water pressure and things like that. And we also have a bunch of jellyfish that have now taken over the lake and made swimming almost impossible. What kind of solutions, suggestions, processes might be helpful for our saltwater lake that is no longer swimmable?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that I know how how to answer the jellyfish question exactly, but the freshwater to brackish water to salt water as a system with different tiers to it is like actually a very pan-global rich habitat tradition, which I could see also working at that site. Like the Hawaiians actually have done a lot with like different kinds of fish in different kind of pools based on how fresh or how brackish the water is. So yeah, I don't think Wapato would work if it's too salt water like, but and I don't, like I would, without knowing more about it, I would be hesitant to like, is the jellyfish a problem, or is there some kind of problem that the jellyfish are trying to solve, or is it just that it's inconvenient for humans, or could it be more diverse in all these ways, which make it a better place for the habitat in general?
Good questions. I don't think we have any answers to those, but those
Right.
are questions we'd have to research and know. Okay,
Yeah.
and then in extension, the land that was dug out, my understanding, and this may not be current, may not still be the case, but the land that was dug out from that lake was dumped over into kind of a wetlands and is extremely salty, has basically poisoned that land for many decades, and has begun to come back somewhat as rain falls and the salt leaches back out of it and is better dispersed. So that is one other thing that would need to be taken into consideration with your design as to how to deal with land that has been salted too much. But it's a problem that is very common in other places too.
Right. I mean, like for those of you in Canada where you salt the roads a lot more, then there's this whole suite of plants. Like, what can you grow along the roadside that's had salt, And so I was just listening yesterday on sea buckthorn, sea berry, likes coastal sites. It is very thorny, but it has a really nutritious berry.
Okay.
I don't want to blanket recommend it because I don't know where it might spread too much, but there
Yeah,
are plants that are adapted to salty conditions. And yeah, it's just a matter of like what plant fits here, instead of like, yeah, something could work usually.
Yeah.
Lori, did you want to have anything you wanted to add before I move into closing?
No, it's just amazing the possibilities that open up when you're working with intentionally around site design and caring for our sacred spaces. I want to just kind of come back to that question. As we restore the land, how might the land restore us and our relationships with people? But then we have a closing.
Can I have one more quick question? You may not be able to answer this, Kelda, but what would the cost to us be to have a permaculturist work with our community? Any idea about any estimate of cost or range of costs?
Yeah, that one's really hard to answer because it would ideally there'd be enough enthusiasm to like do it cheaply for a group that is doing good work. So, but the cost for a permaculture designer can be astronomical as well. Because to do it well, you really have to know a site really well. And the whole way I was able to do just this little bit that I do for you guys is because I spent summers there and saw so much. There's a lot that I haven't looked at. So yeah, if it's someone coming in new, then that's a lot of hours to like even get to the point of observing some of the basics of the site.
Thank you.
Good answers there.
But you also get to see the fruit of that love and passion for the site, for spending time with it, being in relationship with the land that Kelda, just got. I mean, it's been fun watching Kelda and Dean kind of go back and forth with this, just recognizing that we create relationships already that are out there to be passionate about, that to take us forward and doing a better job with it, all of it. So I think it's just been so fun to just see what happens when someone who loves the land has gone back in and done some of this site design, just as we commend forward possible support groups that Dean's going to talk about here.
Well, just quickly, if any of you are interested in staying in touch with each other and perhaps with Kelda and forming a kind of a support or an interest group around permaculture, Please stay on after we do our formal closing, and we'll have an opportunity for people to, explore that idea just a little bit and exchange contact information and maybe even pick somebody who can be the convener for a next conversation for such an interest group. Now let's talk about our next sessions in April. On April 7th, we'll have a presentation on migration and displacement in a changing climate. And our presenter is Dr. Robert McClellan, who is a professor of geography and environmental studies, and also one of the lead authors of the IPCC panel for looking at impacts and vulnerability and adaptation around climate change. That's going to be a great colloquy, and I really encourage you to mark your date and set it aside. Then we're going to have a special screening of a film on April 21st. This is not really our standard webinar, but one of our previous presenters, Phoebe Bernard, who is a professor of biology and other topics at the University of Washington, and a long history of work in the various fields of our environment. She and her husband, John Bowie, who was a film producer, have produced the first of what they anticipate to be 4 films called The Climate Restorers, Back to Our Future. This first film in the series is going to be focused on methane, which is a very significant issue in the short term regarding climate change, because methane has a warming impact 80 times that of carbon dioxide. The film in this first film in the series will be narrated by actor Peter Coyote. And this screening is also a fundraising event to fund the production of the remaining 3 films in the series. So please join us and come prepared to consider contributing to that effort. So thank you all for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded, as all have, and it'll be online. And we encourage you to invite your campground leaders to view the webinar once it's posted online.